I am very honored to welcome Colin Adderly from the City of Calgary to the stage to talk about his experience in designing and deploying a LoRaWAN solution, their challenges and issues, and how they solve them. I'd also like to welcome to the stage Colin's LoRaWAN ecosystem partners, Barney Barnowski from TEKTELIC, John Cherewko from 11X, and Scott Kubes from Orbiwise. Gentlemen. Welcome, guys.
Hey.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So we're going to start off, hopefully you can see over there. We're going to start off with Colin. So Colin, I want you to talk to everybody about your journey with LoRaWAN, how you selected LoRaWAN, how you selected your ecosystem partners, and the use cases that from the beginning to where you are now. So let's hear the LoRaWAN story.
So proud to be an employee of the City of Calgary. We had really a smart city program before it was marketed as a smart city. There was a lot of collaboration, particularly in infrastructure. We had seed funding, so we have fiber connections, we have our own MPLS, we have radio towers. So the opportunity in 2016, we knew that technology was going to be disruptive, and you can either confront change and start to learn how to deal with change as technological progress evolves. We've seen this opportunity with low power wide area network standards in 2016. We did some research. We called a lot of different companies. We wanted to engage in different standards. Particularly, as a city, we would prefer open standards. And at that time, LoRaWAN was kind of the emerging standard. We were lucky enough to be introduced to Barney from TEKTELIC. And from there, in 2017, we were able to procure gateways, install gateways on our radio towers. We learned some infrastructure patterns. And then we had labs set up, and we started to our learning journey. We started experimenting. So we had kind of indoor and lab use cases. We engaged the University of Calgary for research and kind of that type of learning. We had a Living Labs program, so organizations that were interested in LoRaWAN in particular could reuse our infrastructure to prototype and experiment within the Calgary, Alberta ecosystem. And part of our journey was just starting in a lab. And once we became comfortable, there was things that we learned and we pivoted. So we outsourced a lot of use case development early on in the lab, and we learned that we didn't understand enough about the data and the importance of data to these use cases and how it can be reused and how we can act upon it algorithmically. So we built our own rapid POC environment, and we gained confidence, and so we started experimenting collaboratively with our civic partners and business units. And through that process, we started testing in the field. We were able to really, we could buy a sensor if we had documentation proper. We could provision, prototype, and be able to deploy in the field within a 4-hour for 5 devices. So we demonstrated agility. And what we found, and I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but one of the qualities of a low power networking standard like LoRaWAN is we thought it was too good to be true. We had connections through fiber, we have power, we have fixed infrastructure. But there's things, and to have visibility to the things that you had traditionally, it would be a massive construction project and capital. We're able to have visibility to these things. So our thesis was battery-powered devices that could transmit 3 to 7 kilometers in an urban environment. It was mind-boggling. So of course, we set out to prove that it could work or that it wouldn't work.
Did you look at other technologies besides LoRaWAN?
We did. And unfortunately, we weren't able to actually get our hands on it and start doing the work. And so this is where the strength, and I'm proud that John and Barney are both Calgarians, and our ecosystem, very strong. And through our engagement, TEKTELIC really opened the doors and introduced us to a number of partners in the ecosystem, which helped our growth. And so as we moved from the lab to the field, we were able to kind of pivot and really grow. And eventually we moved to use cases that, there's use cases that are non-standard, right? And within the Calgary ecosystem, there's fairly strong networking, and it gets surfaced, and these opportunities come to us, and we can evaluate the risk and prepare. But what happened is there's non-standard use cases, as you can see from kind of 2019 on. And so we would try to engage, and so we got introduced to 11X and Orbiwise and many other partners. And so we started experimenting with non-standard use cases. And what we found was that there was low device volume, but really good ROI. And so now, after 6 years of really learning about everything from devices and RF and data, reliability, accuracy, all that, so that you can algorithmically act upon it, we've definitely learned that there's use cases that can be solved by industry that scale, and then there's customized use cases, and both are extremely valuable to our ecosystem. And so we feel now that we're much more prepared for growth. Typically in the city environment, if you procure a multi-million-dollar, there's a lot of integrated risk. So through small experiments and saving money in the POC and continuing to learn and work with our civic partners, we've been able to gain the confidence and reduce all the risks. And so I think Calgary is very, very comfortable with LoRaWAN as a future technology and an IoT pillar in our ecosystem.
Who are your municipality partners that within your ecosystem, not the LoRaWAN partners, but?
Yeah, so there's two types of ecosystems, really. There's the engagement within the City of Calgary and our business units, and then there's the engagement with technology partners, people who manufacture software, all that stuff. So within it, within our group, there's an innovation group within IT. There's a smart city program, there's fiber, there's MPLS networking. We have a fixed wireless program. So all these programs are already integrated and networked with other business units, such as parks, water services, transportation, roads, transit. And so within our network, there's an awareness of what the potential. So we did a lot of education, but we also did a lot of education through trials and just demonstrating that you can scale up a use case and a POC fairly quickly. But, and we weren't scared to fail, because that was part of our learning process. And we learned as a group, both with the TEKTELICs, the 11Xs, the Orbiwises. We also engaged in a cybersecurity evaluation because there's a lot of fear-mongering, and we kind of want to be able to disseminate facts from, and that was the other thing. There's a lot of things you can do researching white papers, but knowledge is gained by doing, not by anticipating. And so IoT, there's a lot of different technologies emerging, and so the best way to prepare is by really immersing yourself in it and the ecosystem and learning. And we're very thankful for the opportunity to tell our story, and we're very appreciative of all the development that the LoRaWAN ecosystem and this technology and the opportunities it's presented us.
Great. Talk a little bit about your use cases.
Sure. So we, in the early days, there was use cases, and there was some excitement to try some different things. So we work with bylaw, noise monitoring as an example. And there's festivals and complaints. And basically what we were able to do is just read noise levels, at 5-minute intervals, have it reported on a dashboard for our bylaw services, and kind of test it against, different festivals and stuff like that. And so that was one use case. because there's a lot of complaints. There's noise bylaws. Smart agriculture, we had, actually we did a promotion with Semtech, and there's videos online about Devonian gardens, but it's a big exotic garden. There's a bunch of data. Once you understand the data requirements, then it's a lot easier to start to build the ROI from data to solve different problems, right? When you're in Devonian gardens, the lights are installed by electricians, but lights for plants need to be placed based on, what horticulturalists would like to have. So you got to decide, what's the energy requirement? Do you move plants around? Do your life cycle? So we did a bunch of experimentation with that, and we learned about the applications in the process as well. Later on, when we went to the field, we have manholes. So downtown Calgary has, we've got electric supply for our C-train operation, and so water will collect, and when it gets over a certain threshold, we have to pump the manholes out. So by having data visibility, below grade, through manhole, precast concrete, the whole thing, we had to find creative ways to solve that early on. And so we had a couple different designs and tested it, and we kept on pivoting, but now, we can look at the data, we can build predictions, we can act upon it. So a lot of these use cases, we did a smart parking POC as well, and that was just sensors off, prepackaged, off the shelf, tested it. So what we've been able to learn is that the ROI comes in a lot of different ways, but it's very dependent on how you manage the data. And the other part was, through our learning, we found that we do want to have some data sovereignty and some algorithmic control. So even if you have an off-the-shelf solution, we'll want to see that data and store it in a data lake for longer-term planning, because a lot of there's data that you'll use today. There'll be data that you can start to predict, and then there'll be data that you can actually start to do more planning. And we're still in our infancy for a lot of these things. Once you get data after 5 years, you can start planning resources and really getting a better understanding of your operations. So it's an entire learning process for us and the ecosystem, including our partners.
Well, and so 5 years, 6 years deploying LoRaWAN? 6 years.
2017.
Yeah. So that's probably one of the longest cities that have been deploying. And if you look at the number of use cases, that's a lot. And each ecosystem partner will talk about how they were involved in this. But let me ask you a question. What do you feel like is the greatest, what do you love about LoRaWAN, and maybe not so much in the beginning, but now, and what are the things that you feel like could be better?
Well, that's a tough question. We had, I think, early on, understanding how the data worked, how the RF, the reliability, right? You got to move from a thesis to a practical. You got to prove that this stuff works. But along the way, I think, most of the challenges are simply that the awareness of LoRaWAN, when people understood what LoRaWAN was and how it could improve their operation, at least in the Calgary ecosystem, it was contagious. And success actually bred more success. Now, we don't have any large use cases scaled, but you can tell that the use cases continue to grow. We had a little bit of a slower during COVID.
Yeah, I see that during COVID.
But now we're seeing an exponential ramp up and an awareness. Also, I think in cities, we tend to have closed vendor ecosystems. So I think, and it's not actually a negative thing. I think the LoRaWAN technology stack is an opportunity to improve how we do business, and it's challenging status quo. And that's a very positive thing. It's very exciting. But for us, we'll have some vendors that are aware of LoRaWAN, but they're going to build it their way into their products. And so at least what we can do is present that we're aware of how we can plan, we can procure, we can security de-risk, and we can manage the data now. And so we're able to handle, and we're very confident in a number of methodologies and how the ecosystem will come to Calgary and use LoRaWAN devices and make it visibility to things that we, again, traditionally did not have visibility to.
Great. All right. And we'll move on. So in 2024, 2025, you're looking for a big expansion with LoRaWAN?
Yes. There's some use cases that are going to expand, probably more non-standard than standard. When you get to large volume of devices, we have to go through procurement, but we can still prepare our procurement for LoRaWAN. So we're expanding our network and our ecosystem, and we're quite excited.
Do you look for LoRaWAN certified devices? Do they go in your bids or tenders, or?
Yeah, we do have specifications when we ask, through the procurement model. LoRaWAN certification, Industry Canada certification, right? Anything that conforms to kind of our regulatory for electrical devices. Granted, it's battery powered and RF, but Canada has some conformance to device regulations and whatnot. So.
Okay. So LoRaWAN certification is part of their tender. I just want everyone to hear that. All right. So thank you. We'll come back to Colin. Barney, tell us a little bit about TEKTELIC, so they know what you do, and then how you got involved with the City of Calgary.
Absolutely, and just before I jump into that, I really like how you talked about non-standard use cases, because pretty much everything what we've learned that a city does and has been doing is pretty much non-standard. And we'll get into that. So I'm with TEKTELIC. TEKTELIC Communications, we're a gateway vendor. We also develop end devices and some end-to-end solutions as well. And just by virtue of proximity, we were in Calgary. We're based in Calgary. So back in 2017, we engaged with Colin's group. And our first city, right? So we wanted to do a good job, didn't want to fail. And I just remember kind of those initial conversations, right? We came to Colin and the team, and we were coming with this magical technology that can solve everything, right? All the non-standard use cases, we can do it, right? You want to monitor this, no problem. You want to monitor water, track this, count the number of doors open, closed, absolutely can be done, right? So really what that turned into for us was kind of a very early learning about focus, right? Especially within a city context. And everybody wants to sort of jump right into the big use case, right? That's going to drive volume, right? We're a vendor. We want to sell lots of gateways, lots of end devices. No. You need to start a little bit more modest, and you need to really sort of key in on the real pain points that a city has in order to develop trust in the technology, right? And Colin mentioned the use case of the Devonian Gardens. So that's my personal favorite use case in Calgary, because Calgary is, if you know anything about where we are, unless you're maybe from Finland, we're kind of like where Ulu is with respect to the northern hemisphere. So we're pretty much in the snow for up to 7 months out of the year. So all our tropical plants have to be indoors. And obviously that's expensive, right? And if one of those plants dies, it costs a lot of money. People ask questions, right? So really the first IoT deployment that we had was deploying LoRa in these Devonian Gardens to monitor humidity, temperature, soil moisture. And from both a societal and an ROI perspective, there's an immediate uptick in awareness within the city council, within the constituents, right? Because what are you using this technology for, right? We're actually something good. We're solving a real practical problem. The gardeners love it, the people love it. Trees aren't dying, right? We still have the palm trees, right? So in that sense, what we learned was, while you may want to jump straight into kind of a big use case and track things or monitor and do AMI, things like that nature, really you need to figure out kind of where to insert yourself in the conversation, solve a practical problem, and then from there on start asking questions. Well, what else can we do, right? So what else can we do with the technology? And more importantly, in the city context, I've learned is who else is going to benefit, right, within those other departments, right? Who else can create an ROI based around the solution? And then obviously, how do we take some of the other existing technologies and start transitioning them over to LoRa, right? So as you can see, over the last few years, we've certainly worked with the city, and the city's really helped themselves as well. So we did make some initial introductions to the rest of the ecosystem. Now, we also benefited from this. A lot of the initial gateways that we developed we got to test with the city, right? So Calgary has urban canyons right in our downtown course. So for us, it was a great living lab, right? We were able to deploy gateways in all kinds of different locations and really study RF propagation for LoRa. We were able to do, broad testing of geolocalization, again, in very adverse RF conditions. So net, was a very positive experience for us. Glad we did it, and, happy to be one of your ecosystem partners.
Thanks, Barney. John, so tell us a little bit about 11X, how you got involved, and maybe just briefly too on your Center of Excellence.
Yeah, absolutely. 11X, interesting origin story. We're based in Kitchener-Waterloo, born out of the ashes of BlackBerry, everyone's favorite old phone, right? And so when the manufacturing of Research in Motion's arm, BlackBerry, when they stopped making cell phones, this rich, pool of talent was let go. And so there were, some of the co-founders of 11X who got together and said, smart cities, buzzword. What does that even mean? You ask 10 different people, you get 10 different answers. And so, at that time, they decided to focus in on, well, let's talk about the technology. And here's this, this magical long range, low power, battery powered devices, open standard, global standard that is, and standards always win. Our team learned that, so they started to dial in on this and said, okay, well, let's immerse, let's start this company and get immersed in this and focus on outcomes. So real world applications. So not connecting the smart toaster of tomorrow, but the, real world applications for cities and campuses, ultimately trying to make the world a better place, of course. And so, we deployed gateways across Canada and, 35 cities and that sort of thing. And so got to become really good at delivering carrier-grade connectivity and understanding how the gateways work, testing, in our Center of Excellence, which evolved over time, testing all kinds of LoRa devices. It was the Wild West in 2014. Mm-hmm. Are the batteries going to do what are they going to last as long as they say? Is the RF performance going to be what they claim? All these things. So through our Center of Excellence, we tested and tested and tested, and then through the process, design, develop, and manufacture our own devices as well. And so, probably half of the end devices that you're seeing up on the screens there, were either third-party devices that 11X verified for, through our COE for the City of Calgary, so they could deploy with confidence, and or designed and manufactured our own devices here, so that the city could get this data and determine when, like storm sewers are going to back up, in these major flooding events and that type of stuff. And so. Through that process, we've continued to evolve, and found that smart parking is an area of focus now for us, because everyone wants to be in a scalable, repeatable business model, right? Like that's kind of the goal is, doing lots of different things, but then finding that one that's really going to drive value for your customers and is going to catch attention. And so we've really found that in our smart parking applications. And so our company is evolving in that direction. And so, while we've been supporting the ecosystem and supporting the City of Calgary and testing and deploying all kinds of devices, our role is changing too. And that's just, again, part of the ecosystem, becoming stronger and really delivering complete IoT solutions for our customers.
Great. Scott, so tell us a little bit about Orbiwise and how you got in this whole group here.
So it's kind of like down the chain.
You're last but not least.
No. So we supply the LoRaWAN network server that currently Calgary is utilizing through our longtime partners at 11X who run the network. So that's how we became directly involved in talking with Calgary. And there's a lot of work, and since evolution seems to be the key word, evolution of our LoRaWAN network server to make that a better product based on feedback from both 11X and TEKTELIC and the City of Calgary. But Barney had actually introduced us to Colin in Calgary, I think probably a couple years before I think we going through 11X had started up the network. And we've got other mutual friends also there. And Alberta is a huge hotspot for LoRaWAN. If for any of you that ever want to go there, there's a ton of companies and cities and universities and everybody that are involved. It's a really, really active LoRaWAN environment. So it's not only an evolution, but it's also an ecosystem story that really you're looking at the ecosystem here that, you know, Calgary has built and taken advantage of that exists. And so obviously it's made us a better company. We've evolved just as 11X and TEKTELIC have from this work. We've made our LoRaWAN network server a better product. And as we've evolved as a company, and you look at the use cases that Calgary has listed here, you know, one of the things that we've kind of evolved in and started doing, and it's something we've actually had for a number of years, is a noise pollution monitoring measurement solution that Calgary is testing now, and as we are evolving that and evolving our company, and of course, you know, our LNS will always be a core element, but with the noise sensor, we're now talking and working with the City of Calgary and involving them in a next generation project on that. So it will be with Calgary, and you see the University of Calgary listed there. We've pulled them in, so that's back to that ecosystem question again. So it's pulling in multiple interested parties to make sure that you develop the next groundbreaking products in LoRaWAN for the ecosystem. So.
That's great. So, in speaking with everybody on stage here in our preparation for this panel today, the biggest thing I heard, and I'm sure you're hearing as well, is it is about the ecosystem and it's about trust. So you gentlemen have all been working together for 5+ years, and you plan to grow and continue. So when you talk about growing LoRaWAN business, it's not a one and done. It is an ongoing relationship that continues to make each one of your products better and your city better, but it's long term. You know, these guys have been working together for a long time based on the trust and what they've learned. And so into the future, more business there as well. So if you're not a LoRa Alliance member, I highly encourage it because it is about the ecosystem for growth. And if you look at all the LoRaWAN ecosystem partners, there's a lot of partners that are working with the City of Calgary. That's how you drive business. So, and I just have to call it two things, which I just, because I love hearing it. You talked about LoRaWAN was too good to be true, and you said it was magical. So I don't know, I just haven't heard that in the same sentence. Feels good, because we do hear the issues too. So Colin, talk to me about, and the audience, a little bit about the ROI. What does that look like for the city?
Yeah, so when we collaborate, sometimes we need to solve the device problem, then you solve the data problem. So you literally walk through the sense, observe, act, predict model. We really haven't gotten much into predictions, but we're starting to experiment in our IoT programs. But when you sense and you can build the trust that the data is accurate, we would send people to the field to inspect and measure, so you'd build trust in the data. After we built trust, then we could start to observe patterns and build algorithms, triggers, actions, integrate that. And then once you understood the business model through that process, because it's one thing to think that this is gonna work and this is gonna save money, but then you walk through the POC. Once you go through the POC, there's excitement, and you can see that the culture is ready for change. Then it's much easier to flush out the return on investment. And it's not always just for us about money.
But it was money.
Indirectly.
Indirectly. Okay,
right?
So tell us how you got the ROI. What is your ROI?
So we have a 311 program, and it's customer driven. People can dial 311 and complain. And we have actionable items and response times to the 311s. So by having data visibility to things like garbages, right? If it's spilled out and blowing over, somebody can complain. We literally can see that asset, what's happened, what the pattern is, and start to look at, say, time of day correlations, right? and you build that trust into solving those problems. You can't get ROI until you prove that you can actually deliver something. And a lot of solutions right off the street don't necessarily work either. So how do you fuse together an operation that needs efficiencies, but at the same time, the solutions don't quite fit? So once you realize the ROI, it could be loss prevention, right? So an example of like copper theft. We prevented more theft on our LRT lines, right? Other examples like manhole monitoring. We outsourced contracts so we could shift labor and how we manage pumping out the water from the manholes because we had good quality, reliable data. So you can shift resources, you can save outsourcing, you can save costs, and you plus have long-term data for better planning for those assets and learning new ways to do things. So yeah, I agree with all the statements. There's not one way, it's a continuous improvement process.
And what about for the citizens? Any safety or quality environments that you've deployed that impact citizens?
Yeah, like I mean, smart garbage, it's very citizen impacting, right? We've retrofitted a lid through our fleet fabrication shop. And so the first POCs we bolted on and they got ripped off and stolen. When I was out testing the RF and there was people saying, "You're doing that? That is so cool." And then they gave me a bunch of other comments I had to write down and provide feedback to parks because that asset was by a dog park. So. Yeah. Asset tracking, another example where things get lost. You don't need an LTE device and a $10 a month, cost to track these things, right? They don't have to be buses and LRV vehicles. They can be water trailers. They can be construction signs, right? There's also loss prevention. Things get stolen. So there's different ways to problem solve. But a lot of the time, sensors and the technology itself don't solve the problem or give you ROI. It's looking at the total problem, right? Which is the fusion of a business process, technology, and data. And you have to do it as an ecosystem.
Because business process has to change along with how you're
That's
the
right.
data that you're getting.
You can have the best technology and the best data, but if you don't act upon it through your business processes.
Yep.
So LoRaWAN, as an example, just fundamentally, if you're going to ask about ROI, you're saving truck rolls. Two people get into a truck and they got to inspect water fountains or any of these assets that aren't connected to fiber and MPLS. So how do you do that? You can reduce the truck rolls by having remote visibility. Saves you on gas, energy, and labor. So.
Huge. I don't know, I just feel so proud to be a part of this. It really helps with the environment and the cities and the safeties and all the issues that we're dealing with in the world. I mean, hearing Colin talk about solving them, like really, from our end users is huge. And where they're going forward with it is huge. So let me end on this. We'll start with Scott, and we'll kind of come through. We just have about 5 minutes left. I want to hear for the people in the audience that are looking to get into and talk to smart cities and deploy to smart cities. What is your top advice you would give this audience, Scott?
Okay. I know one of the things we had talked about in prepping for this that I had mentioned is that honestly dealing with cities, governments, municipalities, the employees, it's very different from region to region globally. I mean, we're a Swiss-based company out of Geneva, and if you work with municipalities, cities in Europe, it's a very, very different environment to try to sell IoT, to sell LoRaWAN and the solutions and take feedback and so forth, compared to, say, North America. Europe is very regulated. You have the EU, talked about the noise sensor, the regulations around that. So it sets a real concrete framework kind of work around. You move to North America, a lot of times it's fractured, requirements and standards. There's some common things, but it's very different. Then you move to Latin America or Asia, and once again, the way you can approach cities is different across the board. So that's just something to keep in mind. And the great thing there, and kind of going back to the wonderful ecosystem here we have here with the LoRaWAN Alliance, you have global members. We have people from all these regions, and so take advantage of that knowledge. They know how to get into, a city in Australia, Melbourne, or into Buenos Aires in South America, or Geneva in Switzerland.
Absolutely.
And and you work together like we did with Calgary, and that's how you succeed.
So know your market. They're all different. John?
Yeah, two, they're simple. One, talk to your customer and then focus on outcomes. So when you're trying to develop a solution, a sensor or an application, whatever you're trying to do, focus on the outcomes. Like, what are you trying to actually accomplish here? It's not just a neat sensor that monitors something, it should add some kind of real value to your customer. So for sure. And then secondarily, talk them into having some kind of innovation budget. Like, cities and campuses are notoriously slow on their procurement cycles, and this is nothing shocking to anyone in the room here. So if you can talk them into, $100,000 or a couple $100,000, where they can just use this for IoT implementation, exploration, that type of stuff, then it kind of unbinds them from some of those more formal procurement processes where they can try stuff. By trying stuff, then they figure out what's going to make an impact in their community.
So budget.
Budget.
Play budget. Fun money. Barney?
Patience?
Patience.
No, kidding aside, I think, no, I'm not kidding, actually. No, but realistic, what I learned from the City of Calgary is that you have to sort of start small but think big, right? So really, you need to identify that one use case that people care about, right? Whether that's the council or that's the champions of the technology, you need those guys to then help facilitate those innovation budgets, help facilitate those cultural learnings, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, for us, that was the big learning.
Yep, okay. Thank you. So take the small ones knowing you're going to get the bigger ones later.
You got it.
Okay. Colin, you want to wrap this up with any last thoughts to the audience?
Sure.
Take us home.
Take us home.
One of the, and I agree with all the observations as well through our experience. Honestly, our leadership recognized the disruption that we're going to experience through technology. Very proud of it. Somebody like me was afforded to be able to continuously learn, collaborate, and teach and bring knowledge. And I think that sometimes we want to be able to have an outcome instantly and outsource it. And it's not possible. That trust isn't built unless there's knowledge, and that knowledge needs to disseminate in a collaborative fashion, and there's multiple roles in that learning and how that works. So I argue it's not just capital. You have to have knowledge investment to be able to be more disruptive and change within your organization, and your leadership has to champion and sponsor that. So it's not just within what we did. We had other civic partners that invested their resources, right, and disrupt their operation to take on the learning processes. And that, it wasn't just us implementing technology, it was outcome-based learning. And within our internal ecosystem, and there's outcome-based learning with the external ecosystem, right? And that's the biggest advice I could probably, because every operation is different, whether it's a city or a manufacturer, an operation, but the continuous improvement process does take time and investment. And it builds the trust. Once the data's trusted, now you're into algorithmic actions, and you can start to do the machine learning and the AI.
Trust, trust, trust. Trust among partners, trust among your constituents, trust of the technology. I mean, and that takes time, right?
And I would argue trust and fact are kind of the same thing, but lots of times operating groups don't have time to put their head up and think about things. But we're trying to force them when they want to apply continuous improvement with technologies such as LoRaWAN. So.
Great.